built as much upon sampling as it was upon the creation of new sounds, were pressed using the vinyl that had previously held the blues, jazz, and disco recordings that these artists were drawing upon. So we're cued here to begin thinking of a reality that is beyond that of appearances, beyond what is immediately visible, such that these imagined house records, which parallel the records before us, may seem at once somehow haunted by antecedent music, both orally and materially, yet equally, by the same token, may seem to remain importantly open and alive. And I've always pictured this like Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis in the film Freaky Friday, because one voice inhabits the other, and in this way these objects become unsettled and unable to be properly determined. Yet standing before these framed records, our desiring to see here obviously yields nothing, at least nothing out of the ordinary. While this document suggests a possibility for the records it accompanies regarding their own material history, what we are faced with here seems banal, unaltered even. In our looking, these paired records do nothing more than reflect our gaze. In desiring to see and to understand, all we are met with is this desire reflected back unanswered. Yet as we follow this work through the space, through its various dispersed parts, a second cue begins to help us assemble the work. Set on a low plinth to our right are two record covers. We discover these are the associated Dylan and U2 Desire album covers, which through a minimal intervention have become a set of paired collages. Each cover we see has a circle cut from it, a process already typical of many record sleeves, which would ordinarily reveal the label of the record contained within. Yet in this case, the central cutout reveals behind the related section of its paired other, a pairing which produces, through a curious serendipity, a set of uncanny masks. So for me, there's something particularly uncanny about the way that the fold and the singlet of U2 drummer Larry Mullen Jr. and the bridge of Bob Dylan's nose seem to echo each other across these two very disparate moments. And something similar might be said of this shared ear and this second assemblage, both of which produce not only a strangeness, but for me also increase the attention to other ways of sensing that are not strictly limited to the eyes. But with these masks, we begin here to be given a sense of the trading of material identities that has taken place within this project, in which Dylan has become U2 and U2 has become Dylan, producing these strangely figured hybrids. Yet what is particular in these masks? What is particular is that these masks are made through a process of inversion, as like the record label, the inserted sections sit behind, such that the rest of the cover rather performs the masking. In an echo of the house music narrative, these masks, produced in the negative, invert the process of identification, suggesting that the identity of the thing suggests as much in the spaces and processes around it as it does in the appearance of the thing itself, such that these cutouts become like apertures through which another reality might be momentarily glimpsed, one in which the edges and shape of things no longer seem very clear or defined. And standing again in front of these records, though they still stubbornly return our gaze, there is a sense that the left pupil now exists in the right eye and the right one in the left. What is notable here is the way that the inscription exists in relation to the object. While with the Beyonce mug, the inscription collapses alternate ways of thinking both time and desire, conflating them into one sly object, at once both full and empty, a collapse which becomes a kind of closure to be resisted. These records bear a similar double identity, yet here the inscription works in the opposite direction. Rather than collapsing into a stable, overdetermined image, with these objects, their double identity produces a persistent instability, where, like the collages, there is a flip between background and foreground in the process of identification, such that the process of naming never settles. Crucially, rather than the inscription collapsing and overdetermining its object, here it serves rather to open and draw attention to this process of opening, producing a resistance to closure. As we move through the exhibition, we realize these records become a kind of curious center point, not only in their positioning within the exhibition, but also as you seem to be able to draw an eye line to them from each of the adjoining spaces on this lower level, such that they become both a peripheral presence in each work, but also a kind of pivot point around which the rest of the show revolves, producing an odd kind of horizon. Yet echoing this disorganization of our seeing that these objects engender in their double identities, their two-ness produces a paradoxical double center. This thinking of a center is not simply a product of the position and sight lines, but occurs both formally and conceptually too. Of course, the records themselves bear a sense of rotational center in their shape and function, yet further relationships develop, particularly between the vehicle and the records, as well as the records and the world. This image shows the Casbah in the foreground, in which these notional eyes have become also like wheels. The wheels and eyes as a kind of dizzying confection of seeing, and a type of revolution not unrelated to that of Manzoni's plinth. This same relationship is further echoed in the thinking of the two wheels of the motorbike within the More Day Than Beyonce project, a project which occupies the same room as the records, such that one always appears peripheral to the other. This project imagines a response to the mantra on the Beyonce coffee mug we have already encountered. Yet rather than trying to compete in this space of not yet being Beyonce in terms of time as money, this project imagines a way rather to compete against what seems trivial within this mantra, time as time. This project documents an attempt to get more day than Beyonce, an alternate dream made possible through the serendipitous marriage of the world's fastest production motorcycle and the northernmost civilian runway. This runway exists at a latitude such that upon this motorbike approaching top speed, a rider would momentarily cease turning with the earth, pausing for an instant their own passage beneath the sun. The logic of arrogation that underwrites the mug, as a measure of fullness and success, is here extended to the point of absurdity to the idea of time itself, to somehow get more day than Beyonce. Yet paradoxically, this movement also describes a kind of stillness, an attempt to shift the inertia of the body, to become out of sync with the turning world, a kind of time outside of time. Formerly, this project existed within the space as a video projection on a freestanding screen, a set of automatic roller blinds, a set of flip books, and a pairing of document and image. The latter of which, the image, is created by folding the Beyonce mug leaflet, the one we had already encountered at the entrance, back upon itself to produce a new image. Turned now sideways, it appears to become a raised fist, an oddly recognized echo of the raised fist as a symbol of solidarity and resistance, which here holds aloft this sly object of suppression, the mug, now otherwise figured through the act of folding, appearing wordless, and at once door, shield, weapon. So the document which was paired with this sits in a horizontal vitrine immediately adjacent, and it presents as in few words as possible the description of the action, both as idea and as it took place. This brief text tacitly counterpoints the means to capture this moment of stillness by recording the passage of the shadow cast by the moving bike, which would notionally cease its ceaseless expansion and contraction beneath the sun, becoming like a broken sundial, with its undoing, a weather report, becoming cloudy. An idea here is set against the world and by the world obliterated, as we discover midway through the footage that the sun and the shadow become clouded out, the concept lost, and our encounter in this way is shifted to be more about our own senses and body felt in the aesthetic encounter with the footage itself, which is also an image of the world. A similar play between light and shadow characterizes too the experience of the film within the space, as every few minutes the space, which is largely lit by two east-facing windows, is cast into darkness by the action of two automatic roller blinds. These blinds are sequenced with the film, such that as the space darkens, the film plays, and upon its conclusion, the blinds again rise, producing within the space a kind of eccentric sunrise and sunset every few minutes. Again, we encounter a strange kind of timepiece. Here, an attempt to become outside of time becomes also a marking of time, articulated through an insistence upon the action of opening and closing. So I'm going to now just play the footage that was part of this runway project. It runs for 1:30, so this was played as part of the sequence. So the film documents the action upon the runway, presenting a tightly framed, unedited sequence. A camera perpendicular to the bitumen ground frames a shadow cast into the left of the frame, beyond which we must imagine a bike and rider exist, and beyond this again, at a greater remove, the sun. So we see here the concept framed. Yet what this exclusive focus on the shadow also produces, obscuring the other objects of the undertaking, is an intensified attention to the surface of the runway, which is also a surface of the earth. For me, the shadow here produces a curious kind of allegory, as this contact between the shadow and the earth obliquely echoes and stands in for the contact between the rubber and the runway, which propels the bike just outside the frame. Yet this point of contact shifts from being one between matter and matter, rubber and bitumen, to being one between matter and the imaginary, and the play between the shadow and the real. Here the film finds an odd correlation with the records that exist peripherally as you watch. As the film increases in pace, following the acceleration of the bike, the runway itself, intensely marked by rubber, begins to oddly resemble the surface of a spinning record, a correspondence between works induced by their proximity which would not otherwise readily exist. But in this relationship between matter and the imaginary, these records become a curious landscape upon which to imagine the action before us. And as the film reaches its peak in visual intensity, which is caused by this rushing density of vaporized rubber on the road, a similar instability, I like to think, occurs to that's found in the records. So what had begun as a kind of wall of bitumen before us, the horizon lifted into the vertical facing of the projection, at this point momentarily becomes very unstable, appearing itself to kind of vaporize and open. This presents in numerous ways. Not only does it become a kind of wreckage of words in the dissolution of the numbers and markings on the runway, not to mention the dissolution too of the words that announce the conceit of the project in this failed attempt to film the shadow and to capture this moment. It also becomes a wreckage of the line, found in the instability of the runway to itself, which appears at this moment to visually dissolve, a perverse kind of flight produced by the imagined opening of rock and strata. So what might be discursively articulated in this opening remains within this constellation of the work quite deliberately an open question. Although I will just speak briefly to this diagram, which, while not part of the exhibition, has been published elsewhere in relation to the work. So this diagram serves, amongst other things, to visually locate all manner of possibilities which exist under the ground in this place. Possibilities which are further animated by the proximity of the runway to what is known as the Global Seed Bank, or Doomsday Vault, a building which itself appears like a giant sundial, and which houses a kind of forest under the ground, a remarkable collection of seeds held in this place for the future, such that this visual opening in the footage may begin to allegorize in a way a return of different times, and by extension, different ideas of temporality, which occur in the disruption to the time articulated by the action within the project, as an opening in a closed system of the clock. Yet within the space of the exhibition, what for me was articulated in this opening, in the constellation of works as they were installed, was largely located in a set of equivalent openings, not only discovered in the records, but in a complementary way through what became the soundtrack of the work, 3 a.m. Eternal. So riffing off the acid house track 3 a.m. Eternal by the British electronic group the KLF, this work consists of a system built to chase house music around the world at 3 a.m., streaming live house music from a constant 3 a.m. on Earth, consisting within the exhibition of a neon sign, a set of posters, and a sound system. This work was largely present in the space as sound, and was housed in an adjoining room to the runway and the records, the entrance of which directly faced the surface of the projection screen, such that standing, watching the runway footage, it was entirely soundtracked by deep house coming from 3 a.m. somewhere else in the world. In both its musicality and its movement, the imagining of the world this project induces seems, in my thinking, to somehow merge with the records, in a way not unlike the runway footage, while articulating to a relationship to the runway and this related moment of stillness found in